Hello and welcome to The Information, where you'll get all the information on the latest in electronic, indie pop, and experimental music. Today we have an album review. We're reviewing the album Everything is Recorded by Richard Russell by Everything is Recorded. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with the name Richard Russell, he is the head of label XL Recordings, which is based out of the UK. It's a very well-regarded electronic label, which is host to plenty of mega names like Radiohead and Adele, and even Vampire Weekend, but the label is also known for their smaller yet equally formidable artists like King Cruel and Ibeyi and Sampha, and Arca as well. Now this album here, Everything is Recorded, is technically the debut solo album of Richard Russell, which he is putting out under the name Everything is Recorded. And for this album, he didn't stray too far from the path. He decided to collaborate with a lot of the artists currently on the XL Recordings roster. We have appearances by Sampha here. He shows up on about a third of the tracks. We also have other vocal performances by Ibeyi, Sid the Kid, aka Sid from the internet. We also have a couple saxophone solos from Kamasi Washington. And we also have some smaller up-and-coming names like the rappers Giggs, Wiki, and also Infinite, who I'll talk more about later in the review. But Richard Russell basically acts as more of a producer, which is a role that I'm sure he's certainly used to on the record, as opposed to kind of being the front man. He lets the other vocalists kind of write their own lyrics and present their opinions and their ideas on the album, rather than Richard Russell kind of being at the forefront. And with that being said, the album does start off pretty strong with the second track after the intro. It's called Close But Not Quite, which features Sampha on vocals. And this one also features a Curtis Mayfield sample, which is basically the entire chorus. And the song is really interesting the way that the lyrics are structured, in that Sampha's verses tend to lead directly into the lyrics of the chorus, as sort of Curtis Mayfield is kind of picking up where Sampha is leaving off, as if they were both singing the same song. They're kind of playing off each other, which is really nice. Although, to be fair, at the very end, Richard does decide to just play out the sample in full, including the original backing instrumentation. And I feel like that was maybe a little bit lazy. I do like the way he interpolated it better within the context of the actual song, rather than just kind of letting the entire sample itself play out, where he just isolated the vocals here. I thought that worked a little bit better. But that being said, this is still definitely one of the better songs on the album, and a pretty good way to kick it off. We've got some plinking piano melodies, we've got some organic percussion, some really nice soft claps here. This basically sounds like a B-side or a bonus track to Sampha's debut album Process, which came out earlier last year, and that's definitely a good thing. Right after Close But Not Quite is She Said, which features Abang Jayar and a sax solo from Kamasi Washington. The thing that struck me immediately about this song was Abang Jayar's really husky, dry, but really upfront vocals. They're mixed very towards you, towards the listener, and he's singing over a lot of tropical percussion, a lot of shakers and things like that. There's a very squelchy, repetitive bass line that just sort of ascends and descends very quickly as the song progresses. And later on, towards the end of the track, we get that Kamasi Washington sax solo. But what's interesting to me about this one is that, again, with the mixing here, it's played over what sounds like a field recording of a market or something like that, which is really interesting to me because it's kind of mixed in with this field recording in the way that it doesn't sound like Kamasi Washington. It literally sounds like it's part of the field recording, where, maybe Richard was just walking through a market or something, and there was a guy on the side of the road, busking and playing the saxophone. It doesn't really sound like it was Kamasi. It sounds like it could have been anybody. And that was another thing that I noticed about the record, is that some artists were given more of a chance to shine, or at least were utilized more effectively than others. And I feel like over this album, Kamasi Washington's contributions felt kind of minor in that respect, and I felt like he could have been given a larger role, or at least his contributions could have been less of an afterthought. That being said, the next track up here is Wet Looking Road, which is a rap featuring Giggs, and it goes right into this intensely chopped up, Keith Hudson sample. And the sample itself, the way that the vocals are so weirdly chopped and kind of pitched down a little bit, it almost sounds like something Oneohtrix Point Never would do off of his album Replica. The song Nassau came to mind for me specifically. It just has a very very strange, very experimental tone to the sample in the way that it's chopped. Giggs himself delivers a tongue-twisting rap. There's lots of puns and wordplay and variance in delivery here. It is a fairly straightforward song, instrumentally speaking. There's not really too much going on here besides the sample. It's kind of like the main backbone of the track. There's a pretty simple beat. There's like some revving bass that kind of interjects here and there, and you know, the vocals, but otherwise it's a pretty spare track. After this was another track that sampled heavily. It's called Mountains of Gold, and this one actually features Sampha, Wiki, Ibeyi, and Kamasi Washington all on one track. And surprisingly, it's actually not one of the better tracks on the album. The majority, like 90% of the song, is just a sample of Grace Jones's Nightclubbing, and the passage that gets sampled and looped basically throughout most of the song, it doesn't leave a lot of room. It creates a lot of dissonance for Ibeyi and Sampha to kind of sing over this. They don't really have a lot of vocal range to work with, so it kind of doesn't sound very good. The best part of the song is the section where Wiki does his rap verse, and I feel like this song would have worked a lot better like Wet Looking Road if it had just been a rap traditionally and they hadn't tried to bring in the other vocalists, because again, they were kind of almost fighting with the sample. And then right after that we get Show Love, which is another Sampha feature, but this one also features Sid on vocals as well. This one is a very nocturnal, moody R&B tune. I think Sampha and especially Sid both deliver great performances on this track. It doesn't sound like there's a sample based on here, and so Sampha and Sid are given more range to be able to do what they do best, which is deliver really passionate performances. There's also a slight layer of distortion over the vocals for some parts of the song, which gives it a much rawer feel, a lot more passionate and intimate. And the chorus is very amorous and spacey, with flourishes of like electric piano and billowing synths. And after a short interlude, we get Bloodshot Red Eyes, which features Infinite and Green Gart's side of Skritty Polity. And to me, Bloodshot Red Eyes is kind of in contest. It's kind of a 1-2 with Close But Not Quite for what I would consider to be the best song on the album. And that is pretty much anchored solely by the tremendous vocal turn from Infinite. And I had to look this guy up as soon as I heard this song because he was such an amazing vocalist. His range is incredible. He has such a heavenly voice, and then to find out after doing some research that he's actually the son of Wu-Tang Clan member Ghostface Killah. I mean, that's pretty much the most unexpected thing that I could have found out. You could have told me he was like the son of Meryl Streep or something, and I would have believed you more than I would have said that that was the son of Ghostface Killah. But that being said, he has an incredible talent. I really hope he breaks through either this year or next year. I think this was a really great showcase for him. Richard does a great job building vocal harmonies with his voice, and it's a very soulful electronic R&B tune. The chorus lyrically is a little bit cliche if I had to nitpick. It basically plays off pretty closely to that real eyes, real lies meme thing that's been kind of floating around. So that kind of like took me out of the song briefly, but honestly, Infinite's vocals are just too good to ignore and to mark this as a bad song, so they get a pass for this one. Later in the album, the song Be My Friend is another great turn from Infinite. He shows up again on this song here. This one is a little bit more tense. There's a little bit more of a skeletal metallic percussion kind of thing going on here. There's a very slinky, crawling bass line. Infinite definitely sells his vocal performance. He comes across as very desperate. He really does want you to be his friend. The song is also intercut by a sermon by T.D. Jakes, and he says there are moments in our lives when we feel completely alone. And I think that that's good within the context of the song to kind of bring the theme home of wanting a friend to be my friend, you know, that kind of thing. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on the outro track, which is also the title track, Everything Is Recorded. And that one has another vocal turn from Sampha and also contributes string arrangements by Owen Pallett, who has worked with artists like Foxes and Fiction in the past. This one is a really dusky trip-hop tune. I like this one a lot. Owen Pallett delivers some very strong film noir-esque strings. And Sampha, of course, delivers again. On this track here, unlike most of the album, he does actually have a theme that he talks about, where he kind of references the title Everything Is Recorded and just basically makes a plea to kind of put the phone down, put the screen away, put the camera back in your pocket, and kind of just live life in the moment, which is a fair message to get across. I mean, obviously we have artists like Lane 8 and Jack White who are doing anti-phone concerts, so it's a very real and current issue that we have going on, and a debate that's going to still be sparked, I think, years from now, whether the camera phones are a good thing at concerts or not. The chorus here kind of brings that whole message home. Sampha sings, because everything's recorded and nothing is distorted. Deep beneath the surface, do you know what your worth is? And it feels a little bit melodramatic, but I do understand where he's coming from, where he's just kind of saying, you know, if you film everything, you know, what kind of personality do you have if you're just kind of showing people all these experiences that you've had? Like, who really are you when you put the phone down, you know what I mean? And then towards the end of the track, we get another re-emergence by TD Jakes, and it's a little less effective this time around because Richard literally reuses the same passage that we just heard in the track before this, so it kind of gets a little played out. It gets pretty old. Overall, I do like the song, and like I said, it does have a nice message. Ultimately, though, I do find issue with the theme of this song, Everything Is Recorded, kind of not really being extended and fleshed out across the whole album. It feels like ultimately we don't get a good or better understanding of who Richard Russell is as a person, because if this is going to be his solo debut record, I feel like he has to make some sort of statement here, you know, because he was spurred on by a diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder back in like 2013 where he was paralyzed, I think for several months, if I've read that correctly. And that diagnosis and his subsequent getting over of the disease really kind of reprioritized things for him, and he decided to take the music making off the back burner and create this album. And in the end, what we get is not really something that says anything, you know what I mean? He could, you know, talk about the disease a little bit and not even like have to sing or anything like that necessarily, but instead of the TD Jakes samples, you know, just have a little like spoken word passage that he delivers over an interlude or something like that. I think that would be really interesting to kind of see who Richard Russell is, because as of right now, after listening to this album quite a few times, all we really get is a sense of who his friends are, and they just so happen to be the people on his roster. Yeah, I will say that there were definitely some good moments. Like I said, Sampha was probably the best overall here, and Infinite was also very great in his contributions. And if you like trip hop, you know, down-tempo electronic with a little bit of soul and R&B elements in it, I think you'll at least find this album interesting, if not good. Myself, I would probably give this thing a light to decent 6. You know, not every song was great. I didn't like the Gil Scott-Heron cover that Ibeyi did of his song Kane. I thought that was fine, pretty forgettable overall. And I didn't much care for the interludes either. I mean, if you're going to bring Peter Gabriel, of all people, onto one of the tracks on the album, don't make it the interlude, and don't make it to where I can't even parse out his contribution in a 1.5-minute instrumental piece, you know? I understand that Richard kind of liked subverting the expectation of, you know, seeing Peter Gabriel's name on a track on the album, and then kind of having him not really contribute anything of note, but that kind of just is kind of a bait and switch, I think, for fans. And the album itself isn't even very long to begin with, so I'm not really sure why we needed 2 interludes in an album that barely goes over, I think it's like 37 minutes. If you guys have given this album a listen, I know it's been out for about a month or so at this point, let me know what you think. Did you like it, not like it, have a favorite or least favorite track? Did you agree with what I had to say, or did you think I was totally off base? Leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more album reviews. And in the meantime, thank you for watching The Information.